Hey guys, we're the Ferda Family Podcast. I'm Gabe.
I'm Ty.
I'm Hunter.
And I'm Isaac.
So we all know about World War II, but do you guys ever wonder why the Allies won the war?
Oh yeah.
Personally, I think that America joining the war was the greatest turning point that led the Allies to victory.
Yeah, I can see that. We usually are pretty important.
Really? Why do you guys think we were so important to the war?
For a multitude of reasons, bro.
Yeah, Isaac. Did y'all know that the US was initially very hesitant to join the war? So basically, at the start of the war, America upheld strict isolationism. Following World War I, the citizens of the United States were hesitant to get back into all of the economic and political stress of war. Many Americans also believed that going to war was only going to cause more problems than when they had interests to deal with at home. Although he initially wanted to keep the US neutral, FDR eventually wanted to join the war even though he didn't have the support of his people. After World War I, many Americans were disillusioned by the war and even believed in more strict imperialism. And throughout the 1930s, Congress passed a series of neutrality bills that FDR had to reluctantly sign. This backed up the public's fear of getting involved in another war and all the problems that come with that.
Why did FDR not want to join the war?
Well, right after the outbreak of the war in 1939, FDR went to a fireside chat where he discussed the importance of maintaining neutrality. This sentiment, however, started to change later in 1939 when Roosevelt signed the cash and carry provisions. These provisions allowed for other nations to purchase weapons from the United States. This, combined with the economic boom that America was experiencing at the time, led to a massive shift away from the anti-war sentiment and started the U.S. down a path to join the war.
Maybe America's strong economy won it for the Allies.
How would a strong economy win the war?
I'm glad you asked, Hunter. Did you know that during World War II, America's industrial production greatly increased? Every industry, from automobile manufacturers to sheet metal producers, boomed. America, already the world's largest economic producer, doubled its economic production over a 4-year period during the war. U.S. President at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt, stated how powerful enemies must be outfought and outproduced. FDR clearly stayed true to the statement, as out of every Allied power, America actually supplied the Allies with the most wartime supplies. America supplied over 2/3 of all Allied military equipment via government initiatives, the main one being the Lend-Lease program.
Lend-Lease program. I think I've heard of that. What's that about, and what did it do for the Allies?
The Lend-Lease program, which was passed on March 11, 1941, allowed for the United States to aid any country under attack that risked the United States' national security. In June 1941, Nazi Germany invaded Soviet Russia. America deemed this as a threat to our national security. As a result of this, following FDR's program, America supplied the Soviets heavily with supplies. After fighting on the Eastern Front for a few months, in August 1942, Germany launched a large offensive into the city of Stalingrad, a major industrial and economic city of Russia. This invasion alarmed the Americans heavily, causing an even larger influx of supplies sent to the USSR. In total, the United States supplied Russia with over $18.3 billion in rations, aircraft, vehicles, ammunition, and firearms, now being worth upwards of $180 billion in modern times. This effort by the U.S. allowed the Russians to prepare sufficiently for the harsh Russian winter the Nazis were unequipped to handle, ultimately causing Germany's loss and Russia's victory on the Eastern Front.
I think I get it, Ty. So you're saying America didn't directly participate in the war, we just aided the Russians using the Lend-Lease program to gain victory on the Eastern Front?
Well, not really. Eventually, after the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan, which was due to the U.S. implementing a subsequent oil embargo on Japan, the U.S. had officially joined the war and was bound to participate in many battles in both the Pacific and European theaters. Upon America's entrance to war, U.S. troops were now being deployed throughout the globe in different theaters where many battles were taking place. America's involvement in the war began after the attack on Pearl Harbor, but it was a defensive reaction rather than an offensive one. On the other hand, the first offensive and strategic battle that the U.S. took initiative in was the Battle of Bataan in the Philippines, which was still a U.S. territory at the time. Both the United States troops and Philippine Commonwealth troops fought against Imperial Japan in an attempt to keep the Philippines as their territory. Despite a strong fight from the U.S., Japan's forces overpowered Commander General MacArthur and took control of the Philippines. Japan had claimed that the Philippines would be liberated from the U.S. in 1943, but this promise was never fulfilled. MacArthur and the Allies in the Battle of Iwo Jima would come back to retake the Philippines and liberate American prisoners from war, using the newly won territory as a crucial airbase. If it wasn't for the US, who knows what the Philippines would have been like after Imperial Japan.
Oh, so not only did American supplement efforts aid the Allies, their powerful military offensive and large number of men aided the Allies to victory in both the Pacific and in Europe?
Yes, that's exactly it. Other examples of the U.S. military involvement includes battles such as the Battle of the Atlantic, D-Day, and the Battle of the Bulge. In June 1941, the U.S. began participating in naval battles throughout the Atlantic. The U.S. Naval Force, Coast Guard, and Air Force were critical aspects of maintaining control of the Atlantic during wartime. One of the main strategies the U.S. used during the Battle of the Atlantic was a convoy system, in which many merchant ships were guarded by warships, reducing the effectiveness of German submarine attacks. Also, new technologies such as depth charges sonars and Hedgehog anti-submarine detectors located any of the powerful naval ships Germany had, such as U-boats. Lastly, America's great industrial power was able to produce multiple ships to replace damaged ones and continue deploying troops in Europe.
Wait, so what was fighting like in Europe?
So while in Europe, the grounds in which battles took place was known as the European theater. A theater of conflict is known as a geographical place where multiple military events occur. In this theater, there were millions of deaths of both civilians and troops in both participating countries and in neutral countries. For starters, towards the end of the war, the Battle of D-Day on June 6, 1944, also known as Operation Overlord, was a game-changing invasion of World War II. U.S. and other Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy, France, in order to initiate the liberation of Western powers, which was held under Nazi control. Paratroopers, naval bombardments, and aerial assaults resulted in high casualties, but was the reason for the Allies' success and was a turning point during World War II.
Were there any game-changing battles in the European theater?
Why, yes, there were so many more, but this podcast would be way too long if we talked about all the fighting that took place. So instead, I'll finish the European theater with the Battle of the Bulge, fought on the Western Front. This fight was the last major German push, an attempt to split up the British and American armies, creating a bulge in the fighting lines. Hence, that's where it got its name, Battle of the Bulge. Although Germany covered some ground, American forces were able to hold their ground in Bastogne, and eventually led to the Allies' victory, depleting Germany's resources and reserves and leading to the end of the war. In addition, the Italian campaign was a series of military operations in Italy done by the Allies. After victory in North Africa, the Allies took control and started looking at Italy as a strategic move. Operation Husky, organized by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, involved the Allies invading Sicily. The U.S. worked with Winston Churchill to start a two-part invasion of mainland Italy. The Allies gained control of Italy in September of 1943.
Alright, wow. So, although the United States and the rest of the Allied powers supplied materials and their troops in order to win the war, it is also important to note that the United States had many losses and sacrifices. America made a multitude of sacrifices during World War II. Starting from the beginning, on December 7th, 1941, less than 24 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, FDR gave a speech to Congress, formally asking to declare a state of war between the United States and Japan. During his speech, Franklin D. Roosevelt stated, "Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that this Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire."
Did the US retaliate at all?
Yeah, actually in April 1942, Doolittle's Rain Spring occurred. The Allies turned against Japan and raided Tokyo along with other cities in Japan. This, as twisted as it may sound, genuinely lifted American spirits. A month later, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, Americans and Australians succeeded in stopping the Japanese drive towards Australia for the 5-day battle.
Oh wait, this sounds vaguely familiar. What was the 5-day battle? It was called something mid-something?
Yeah, you're thinking of Midway. The Battle of Midway was a 5-day battle in early June of 1942. For context, Midway is an island that lies northwest of Hawaii. Midway was Japan's next target, but the Allies were able to stop the Japanese from overtaking it. At the end of the battle, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, a cruiser, and 250 planes. This battle was an extremely crucial turning point in the Pacific War because afterwards, the Allies adopted a new military tactic.
New military tactic? What was that?
This practice, skipping over heavily fortified islands in order to seize lightly defended locations that could support the next advance, became known as island hopping.
Oh.
I see it's all coming together.
Yup. Now, let's move on to one of the last huge battles of the war, the Battle of Okinawa in April 1945. The U.S. Marines invaded Okinawa, a chain of islands south of mainland Japan. The Japanese unleashed a whopping 1,900 kamikaze attacks on the Allies. In case you don't know what those are, kamikaze attacks are suicide missions employed by Japanese pilots during World War II. These pilots would deliberately crash their aircraft, which was loaded with explosives, into Allied ships, primarily in the Pacific theater.
Wow, that's a really tough topic. What was the damage that occurred during these kamikaze attacks?
I mean, in this battle alone, the kamikaze attacks sank 30 Allied ships, damaged 300 plus Allied people, and killed around 5,000 seamen.
Ooh.
Almost unimaginable.
You could say.
On June 25th, 1945, fighting ended. The Allied powers won World War II. Approximately 76,000 Americans died.
That is really sad. So I want to thank everyone for our podcast.
你的笑脸就像我的春天。
Peace out, fam.
Bye, everybody.